In this video, we're looking at two books that are centered around the same theme: ordinary people going out of their way to do extraordinary work for other people. We're looking at Courageous Calling by Ryan Holiday and India's Most Fearless by Shivarur and Rahul Singh. Have you ever been around a bunch of people and just hearing them talk makes you also want to do whatever they're talking about? Maybe being around runners makes you want to put on your pair of sneakers and go out for a run as well. This is exactly what reading Courageous Calling feels like. In it, Holiday talks about courage being one of the core values of the Stoics. And if you aren't familiar with his work, his other books also revolve around Stoicism and the philosophy of the Stoics. In Courageous Calling, you learn about people from the past, from Florence Nightingale to Charles de Gaulle, who faced adverse situations and, owing to them saying no to the easy path despite all of the difficulties in their way, went down in history as some of the greatest people to push the needle forward. This book is full of great quotes, but the central theme of the book revolves around taking away any hesitation you may have of choosing the courageous path. Some quotes go something like, "You can curse the darkness or you can light a candle. One courageous person is the majority." Throughout the book, Holiday's point is to try and change your perspective on the fact that the people we now know as heroes of their time were actually just ordinary people who were choosing to take the difficult path for a good that was greater than themselves. You and I can choose to do the same. Which leads me very well to my next book, which is India's Most Fearless by Rahul Singh and Shivarur. Now, I have a lot of feelings about this book. I was raised during my formative years in an army background, so I've seen the army life firsthand. So this book is sort of near and dear to me. Not only that, I've also recently gotten into reading about war stories, studying war, and personal accounts from people who fought them. But these were typically American people giving their accounts. So these were people like retired Lieutenant Commander Jocko Willink, retired Colonel David Hackworth, and retired Chief Petty Officers Chris Kyle and David Goggin. So I was very happy when I saw this book and I immediately bought it. If you are not familiar, India has a long history of fighting wars since independence. And to me, studying war is a very fascinating topic because it always intrigues me what leads someone to want to lay their life for their country or for their fellow soldier. From a leadership perspective, I can think of no situation with higher stakes than leading troops into battle. And even in general, I think people in India and otherwise don't appreciate the freedoms that are given to them through the sacrifices of others. I also don't think people appreciate the lengths to which some people will go to make sure that the job is done or a fellow soldier gets to come back home. Which is why I think it is so important for people to read this book, especially people from India. The stories in here are real accounts of people going to great lengths to make sure they serve out the duty assigned to them. Some survived and others didn't. The stories in here are real instances of people showing camaraderie, courage, and selflessness that is so rarely seen in the civilian world today. I think we all stand to learn a lot from this book. This was the book I had with me before the Malnad Ultra, which was a 50-kilometer ultra run that I recently completed. It helped me put into perspective where my struggles were compared to somebody else's struggles. You know, my legs might be feeling like jelly at 40 kilometers and I might be finding it very difficult to walk, but that hurt is still nothing compared to the hurt of chasing down a terrorist with a bullet in your abdomen. It helps me stay humble. I build software with my teams, and we often talk about war stories, things that have gone seriously sideways when developing software. But when you maintain a broad perspective, you realize that those are not war stories. Those are jokes compared to actual war stories. This book will give you real war stories. The armed forces of any country are as old as they get, and executing well is a job requirement for them. That's another reason why I think the age-old lessons that they have learned are a good practice to implement for any organization. As an example of how these things translate, in the army, a leader's job is to make sure their soldiers are well trained with no slack so they get to go home. In engineering, our job is to make sure that engineers are well trained with no slack so they get to build a bigger home. I think this book is definitely worth the read, and I have only a few gripes with this book. Having read and listened to first-hand accounts from American soldiers who have served, I can tell you it is much better when the person on the field describes what they went through. So that is something I'd be far more interested in seeing, is army personnel who were in the situation describing what it was like through books and podcasts. Now, I fully understand the reasons why defense personnel would be motivated to not share their stories publicly, But if you are someone from the armed forces or know someone who is, and you are comfortable in sharing your stories, I highly encourage you to do so, because a lot of us would learn a lot from your experiences. So that's all I have for you today. Both these books are worth their weight in gold, and I highly recommend you check them out. Until next time, take care.